Hi, this is Derek with Lare Garden Center, and I have Chloe behind the camera. Say hello.
Hello.
And today we're doing a introduction for houseplants class for Waukee Library. So I'm going to kind of bounce between points, but I'm going to cover repotting. I'm going to cover a little bit about pests, kind of an introductory side of it, what size pot to put in, lights, and watering. So I'm going to try to touch on all those. It is a lot to talk about, so a lot of it's going to be skimming, but it should at least be able to get you a good start for growing your own houseplants at home. The first thing I'm going to start with is what's in front of me, I guess. So these plants actually come with the class. There'll be one, of course. There's obviously a selection here, so that I just kind of want to show a little bit about you could get any one of these possibilities in it. So I have a little bit of the selection in front of me here. And then this pot, I'm just going to kind of demonstrate pot sizes, and I'll talk about this stuff in a moment. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is the environment that you have, that you're going to put your plant in. Obviously, not everybody has a nice, beautiful, sunny greenhouse like it is behind me. Most people have a window, and they're lucky if they have a north or east window. The good news is that's fine. So for light, within 6 foot of a window is considered good bright light, and it doesn't even matter the direction it faces. Obviously, a south window is going to be the best, but even a north window is fine too, as long as it's right and close to the window. If you have an older house, like a drafty kind of situation, maybe it can't be so close. It might have to be a couple of feet away, but just near the window if you get the point. Because I see a lot of people now trying houseplants in the middle of a dining room table where it's not near a window, and that's fine, but you really do need to put the plant close to the window at least some of the time. So for example, you could do an alternation, like maybe 1 week next to the window and then over next to in the table for a week, kind of alternate week by week like that, because they do need some light at least. So anyway, near the window is bright light, so anything like that will work fine for that way, and it doesn't even really matter the plant. Low light plants do generally good in any window, but some, unless it's like a bright sun, then they might burn. And some of these plants, I'm going to kind of put them forward. Those are probably our low light plants, and I'll just kind of go over each one. We have peace lily here, philodendron, Dieffenbachia is that one, fern, syngonium or elephant ear. This one's cordyline. And this one here is a variety of sedum in there, so it's a nice little trailer. Lots of different habits, of course, but that's kind of what we have here. So I wanted to talk about, let's do repotting next. So a lot of people transplant a little plant like this into a big, giant 6 to 8 inch pot. That's actually too big for a plant this size. When you're transplanting houseplants, you always want to do 1 to 2 inches bigger than what it's currently in, but not any bigger than that. So that's going to be, this is a 4 inch pot right here. This right here is, I'm going to guess, I was hoping it would, okay. It actually says this is a 4 inch pot too. So I probably should have went a couple inches bigger, but it's not terrible either, because it kind of depends upon, I'm actually going to pull this out just so you can see it. This has some root bound going, if you want to zoom in and show them how that looks. This has some roots touching the bottom, but I would actually say this plant, oh, sorry about that. This plant might be able to, it might be able to wait for maybe a couple more months. When all the soil's filled completely with roots, that's when it's time to transplant. Usually when I transplant, so let's say this was ready and I'm gonna go ahead and put it in there. Plant in there, always make sure your pot has a hole in it. Otherwise you can end up with overwatering issues. So putting it in there, the first thing I'll do is I'll actually jumble this out, which I'll just do it, it's okay. So jumble that out like this to make sure all the roots are loose. Then put in the pot and put some soil around there and water it in really good. And then you won't need to water that for, I don't know why I said that. Water it right away. You won't need to repot it for a couple years probably. So it could probably last a couple years in that pot before it really needs to be transplanted, and some of it might depend upon how fast it grows. If this plant really takes off this year and it just one of the things to look for when a plant needs to be repotted is if it starts to dry out really fast, like you water it and 2 to 3 days later,
it's already dry, it's probably a sign that it needs to be repotted. And if I take this off and I see roots starting to come out of the bottom, that's another sign. Another sign is if the soil gets really tight and you can't really put your finger through it because there's so many roots in there, that would be a third sign. So look for those signs for repotting. But generally, depending on the plant, it's every 1 to 2 years that you have to transplant. And sometimes more. Some of my house plants go 5, 6, 7 years before I even think about repotting. So that's the repotting part. Let's see. Covered repotting, a little bit about light. I'm gonna kind of do some troubleshooting now from this point. So there's obviously a lot of different avenues I can go into because there's a lot of different problems that plants can have. There's a lot of different pest issues, so I won't cover every single one, but what I'm gonna tell you is what to look for. And then when you find something, I encourage you to go to either online research yourself or go to a garden center to kind of figure out what the problem is. Because you want to know exactly what problem you have before you treat. And the other thing is not to really freak out too much if it happens to be a bug issue right away. First, get it diagnosed. Well, first, quarantine. So if you ever have a problem with the plant that you suspect is an insect, quarantine it from all the rest, and then start to figure out what it is and go into a treatment plan after that. So another thing about quarantining is I do recommend whenever you buy a house plant or get a house plant, just to be safe, quarantine it for a couple of weeks away from the rest, just because you really never know, and then move it into the rest of the population with the rest of your plants. So I would say something like that. Okay, yellowing leaves, that can be a sign of underwatering or overwatering, and the reason why I give both is because if a plant is overwatered, usually roots start to get killed off by fungal diseases, and the plant can't take up water anymore. So wilting and yellowing leaves could be underwater or overwater because of what I just said. A lot of times I have to unpot the plant to see what's going on. And one, if the soil seems to be really dry in the center of the plant but moist on top, that's a sign that it's not getting enough water, and underwater is probably a sign. But if I were to take it out and the soil's sopping wet and the roots are discolored, they're not a nice creamy white like they should be, or the roots fall off, when I kind of pick at it and the roots fall off, then that's a sign of overwatering. Underwater plants can be saved by soaking the plant in, I would put the whole root ball and everything in water for about 20 minutes and let it soak. Then it should perk up in a couple hours to a day. If it's overwatered, like I just said, usually there isn't a way for that plant to recover, and unfortunately you have to start over again for that one. So I really try to avoid overwatering when possible. So with that, I'm actually gonna kind of talk about watering a little bit. A lot of people like to take the watering can and drizzle a little bit of water on top and call it okay. The first thing, like I said, make sure the pot has a hole on the bottom you're going into, otherwise you're not going to be able to do some of the things I'm about to talk about. When you water your plants, you actually want to water it to the point where water is dripping out of the bottom. That way I know the whole soil volume from the top to the bottom is all the way moist. Sometimes I'll be here at the garden center and someone will come in with a plant that's wilting and doing terribly and they totally think it's overwater, and I take it out and I see what happened is they just kind of drizzle a little water on top, like, ooh, that's good, and then they're done. But the soil on the bottom gets so bone dry, it doesn't take up enough water, so it wilts just like it would be if it was over water. And I tell them to soak that plant, because sometimes when a plant is really, really dry and you water it, if the water starts to go out of the bottom almost instantly after you're putting it in there, that's a sign that the soil is starting to get so dry in the center it's shrinking. So I like to put a saucer underneath there, fill it, and let it fill up the bottom of the saucer. I don't leave it in there for too long though. I only leave it in there for about 20 minutes, and then I take the water and dump it out. So that's kind of how you water. Make sure you do that. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't want to put too much on there, but it's not how much. I could pour 1 gallon of water on this one little plant and it wouldn't be too much as long as the water is draining out. So for how much, just make sure you water it enough for the water to drain out the bottom. That's kind of the key point for that one. Do you think I covered it all, Chloe, on that
I think
part?
so.
So I just wanted to spend a little bit of extra time on the watering part because watering is such a big deal. And just so you know, just for the sake of conversation, more people tend to overwater their plant than underwater their plant. So keep that one in mind. So how do you know? That's a good question. How do I know it's time to water the plant then? What I do personally is I take my finger and see how it feels first. If it still feels moist to the touch, this plant actually could probably use a little bit of a drink because it is kind of dry. But if it feels moist to the touch, I wait a few more days and check it again. The other thing I do is I pick the plant up, see how heavy the pot is. In this case, it's a little bit light, so again, that also tells me, that's my second cue. I'm like, yes, there's two things that are now telling me that it needs to be watered. And then I water it, and I check it again right after I water it, just so I can get a mental note how heavy that pot feels. And then I go wait a couple days and I pick it up again, and you'll notice it getting lighter and lighter, and at some point you won't even need to test with your finger. You'll pick the plant up and you'll be like, oh yeah, that's ready. So that's kind of how I personally tell how to water my plants or when to water my plants. For me, it ends up being, I have a lot more succulents, but I do have a few tropical plants, but it ends up being kind of once every 2 to 3 weeks for me. So kind of 1 to 2 times in a month is what it is for me when I'm watering. So just kind of keep an eye on things like that, and you shouldn't have any problems at all. So that's kind of the watering part of it. I talked about repotting. That's a really big one. I told you about how to look for a few troubleshooting issues, but I kind of wanted to go into it a little bit more. So if a plant has the yellowing leaves, we already talked about the underwater or overwatering, but let's say a lot of the leaves are turning yellow in the center of the plant. That's a sign that the plant may not be getting enough light. If the plant is having discolorations or browning, especially on one side, like for example, the side that faces the sun from the window, that could be a sign that it's too much light. So too much light, it's gonna burn, or the plant leaves are going to turn brown on one side, usually facing the window. So it could be intermittent and spread. But if it's a lot of yellowing leaves way in the middle, and a few yellowing leaves are normal because plants lose those leaves in the center as the outside leaves grow. But if it's like more than 25% and the plant is starting to get really leggy and you're seeing really skinny growth, that's a sign that there's really just not enough light and it needs to be moved into more light. So now I kind of wanted to go into the insects part for a second. Let's see, there's so many different avenues I can go. That's why I'm kind of stumbling. I'm gonna cover a few of the bigger insects, because it's probably like 50 or 60, so I don't want to go into every single one, but I'll cover a few. And one of the big ones I see are spider mites. And what those look like, you won't be able to see them to the naked eye when it's a very low infestation. But as it starts to get bigger, you'll see leaves that are starting to kind of get a stippled or kind of a sandpapery. I don't know how to describe it without.
Yeah.
So it kind of gets a sandpapery look, and you'll go in there and you might even see a little webbing, especially where the cracks of the leaves are. One thing you can do is you can get a white piece of paper and go underneath there and kind of go like this, and usually you can see the spider mites. That's a very common one, especially they really like ivies and they like environments that are dry and warm. So they start to pop up this time of the year and sometimes in the middle of the summer. They don't like water. In fact, water kills them. You can even just spray them with water, and sometimes that'll do it. But increasing humidity is one way to deal with those. Another is, I want to just pull those out really quick. The reason why I talk about the neem and the insecticidal soap is because these two products cover a wide range of problems, and it's something that the average homeowner may want to have on hand just in case. So that's insecticidal soap like this and neem like this, and both these are organic products, just in case you're wondering. But I would just take something like that with the spider mites and spray that down. Again, I've already taken this out of the population in quarantine, and I'm gonna spray once a week with that. And if it's a severe infestation, let's say I didn't catch it and the whole plant is covered with webs and 50% of the leaves are brown and bad, I probably would just want to get rid of that plant, because it's just going to be too much of a chance that it's going to spread into the rest. So I would just get rid of it at that stage. So that's kind of spider mites, and that's a common one. Another one is fungus gnats. Those are the little fruit flies you see, and how those work is the babies are in the soil, feeding on the organic matter in the soil, And the adults are the ones that fly around and they're annoying, but they're not doing any damage to the plant. So a lot of people try to catch the adults to deal with the population, but you want to deal with the source where the babies are coming from. And for that one, I recommend some of the insecticidal drenches, so to speak. So that's something you're going to sprinkle on the soil. I have one over there. I'm going to grab it. So it's over there, isn't it? No, it's been taken off. So I'll just talk about it. Apparently one of my coworkers wanted it for I have it out here, but I don't now. That's okay. I'll just tell you about it. So it's a product called Mosquito Bits is the one that I personally use. So that's Mosquito Bits. For that one, it's sprinkled on top of the soil, and it's an organic way to, what happens is there's a certain kind of lower level fungus that attacks fungus gnat larvae, and it kills the babies. And it takes a while, like 3 months, but it will get rid of the population eventually, and you'll start seeing results right away. There's another one called a systematic control. There's any one number. They sometimes come in pill form or powder form. You can sprinkle that on and it will deal with those too. But mainly thing I want to talk about is get rid of the babies. The adults don't really do any damage. So it's kind of mentioning that one. And the final pastel cover in today's class will be scale. That one's a really difficult one to deal with, by the way. If it's a severe population, I don't even deal with it. I mostly just kind of get rid of. Scale usually looks like little tiny bumps, and they don't even look like bugs. They just look like little black dots that are attached to the leaves, so you have to really keep an eye on that. But they like to hang out on the leaves or on the tops of leaves like that. So they really kind of hang out in just the grooves. So keep an eye for something like that. And for treatment of those, it's going to be just a systematic control like I just talked about with the fungus gnats. You want to treat that in. So how that works is usually it's a powder you put on the top, you water it in, and it goes into the roots, and it works its way through the plant, and it kills them that way. So that's how you will want to treat those. Those are probably one of the most difficult pests to treat. Another sign is, they call it honeydew, so it's kind of like a sticky substance that forms on the leaves. The reason why I'm mentioning that one is because that is a symptom of multiple different pests that I just talked about. So if you ever see like a sticky clear substance forming on the leaves, that's a sign you have a pest problem. Mostly I want to encourage with those is, again, having those products on hand, and there is products that are specialized to deal with every single one of those individually, and they're stronger usually. This is weaker, but it does a lot of different types of different things. So for those, I kind of recommend either doing a lot of self-research or just bringing into a garden center and having them help you, because that's the best way to do it. And I can tell you that I found personally it's better if I can, for example, sometimes people can email me, but it just does a lot better for me to see what I'm dealing with, so I can give the symptoms and diagnose it right then and there. So if there's a problem, and hopefully you won't have one, I just recommend bringing it in. So I'm going to kind of conclude that part because there's so many different ways you can go. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, I got some potting soil. I don't think that really matters so much. This is organic. I tend to get name brand potting soil because sometimes potting soils can actually come with fungus gnats. So make sure that you have a good product and you don't see any little bugs flying around it when you buy it, and you should be good to go. So that's kind of the potting soil. Fertilizer, I just grabbed one. There's a lot of different kind of fertilizers you can get, but I just grabbed one, which is my favorite. Oops, that's the front. So this is Schultz, and it's an eyedropper kind. I'll just pull out of the box so you can see it. That's what it looks like right there. And you screw the top off and it looks like an eyedropper, and it goes right into the watering can. And the reason why I like it is because, well, one, it's a good product. It's got everything in there it needs. And the other part is because it's clean. The blue powder is nice, but if you drop it on the counter or something like that, it can kind of be staining. So I just like it because it's a little bit cleaner. So for those, I do once a month, but I only do between kind of like March, when the days start getting longer, and I go all the way until about September 1st, and then I quit. I don't fertilize my houseplants in the winter unless it's something that's blooming in in the winter. Like for example, some of the orchids or some of the Christmas or Thanksgiving cactuses, they bloom in the winter, so I will fertilize those once right before they flower. Everything else, I don't do that until between those months. And I do it once a month in there. You think I'm missing something so far? What do you think a new person might want to know about houseplants?
I think you've covered just about everything.
What was your first question you had though? Oh,
I had a lot of questions about bugs.
okay, so
I
that's
didn't
kind
know
of a big
much,
one.
yeah.
So hopefully I covered that one pretty good. And like I said, there's a lot of different avenues in there. So for houseplants, it's making sure you have good, adequate light and they're within 6 feet of a window. Repotting with good quality potting soil, I would say once a year to once every few years, depending upon what it is. And again, not doing in too big of a pot and making sure the pot has drainage holes. Knowing the good products to use just in case something forms. Got those good all around ones right there, or some fertilizer. And again, if you just kind of want to do a quick pan, these are the house plants that you could be getting in your plant, in your class. Lots of different cool choices. If you have any questions on any individual one, you can always ask us. But otherwise, I think that's good for this class. So I think I'm going to conclude there and thanking Waukee Library for partnering up with us for this one and for you guys for watching it. You can always go to our Facebook page at Ted Lare Garden Center if you want to have a specific question. Maybe you're like, oh, what about this plant, or what is this plant? If you're not sure what it is, we'll be happy to identify it for you. Contact us if you have any questions, and thanks for watching our class.
Thank you.